What's up, y'all, and welcome to another installment of the For the Gram podcast. This is the show where I, Jaksyn, your host, am going to bring you through a topic of interest to me, whether that's something new happening in the world, or some kind of hip trend, or just some kind of cool thing that I remember from my childhood. But in the end, it's all going to be relevant enough for the gram. This episode, I'm surprised it's taken me so long to do this, but this episode, I'm going to be talking about the Ninja Turtles. Yes, I love the Ninja Turtles. They were my comfort show growing up, and so I can't wait to dive into some of my hard-earned Ninja Turtle knowledge for this specific episode. The reason I am talking about it today as opposed to some days at another point down the line is I was recently out for Halloween, and there was an interesting question that sprung up about my social media feeds and things like that, and it was, outside of the context of anything ever, do you know who April O'Neil is? And I do. So I instantaneously was like, yeah, duh, doesn't everybody? But the overwhelming response to that question is no. And I don't get that. I mean, it's probably just because nobody watched Ninja Turtles, but I feel like it was a pretty big deal. So if you don't know, we'll get to that in a second. But the Ninja Turtles, for those who are unaware, are four mutant turtles who are named after Renaissance painters. So there's the blue one. He's the leader, and his name is Leonardo, after Leonardo da Vinci. And then you have the smart one, who's the purple one, and his name is Donatello. And then you have Raphael, who is the red one, and he's the high-tempered, short-fused Ninja Turtle. And then you have Michelangelo, or Mikey, who is the orange Ninja Turtle, and he is the dumb one. But that's just your basic background for the Ninja Turtles. And so the Ninja Turtles are just four turtles who go around New York City. They live in the sewers, and then they go out and they fight crime and all that sort of stuff. And it's super fun. And they eat pizza all the time because they're in New York, and New York has great pizza. So the first thing mutant turtles do when they leave the sewers that smell really bad and go to the surface, they get pizza, obviously, because pizza is one of the greatest foods that man has ever created, and it's great. So the Ninja Turtles in every iteration of the story are trained by Master Splinter, who is a mutant rat, who's like a genius with martial arts for some reason. And so he teaches them all their like fighting that they do. And so they're Ninja Turtles. And they have weapons that are associated with all of them. Like Leonardo is the leader, and he is the one in charge of making all the like decisions amongst the group. And so he is the one who has the sharpest, most deadly of the weapons. So he carries two katanas, which are swords, and he is the only one who has a sharp weapon. And it's because he's the one who has to make all the decisions amongst the group, and so he's the one who has the weapon that is correlating to that. Donatello is the smart one, so he is given a bow staff. So it's just a stick, as they make fun of in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, the movie that just came out. They make fun of the fact that Donnie just has a stick, and he can't really do anything with that. And so he is the smart one, so he has to determine how he is most effectively using the bow staff. And then Raph has the Psy, which are a very controlled weapon, which is like sort of the opposite of his personality because he's the angry one. So he likes to go in swinging all the time, but he has a weapon that requires precision and more defensive strategies as opposed to aggressive strategies. And then there's Mikey, who has the nunchucks because he's the dumb one, and so he has the most difficult weapon to use out of the four of them, arguably, because nunchucks are require a wide variety of skill and precision to use. And so Mikey is the one who has those because he needs to learn throughout the show how to control and like focus on certain things like that. And so the Ninja Turtles are super cool, not just because they're four turtles that fight robots in New York City, but they're also brothers. So like you get the family dynamic with the Ninja Turtles, and they like mess with each other all the time, but it's all in like a loving way. And then so the Ninja Turtles are those four, and then Master Splinter is their rat master who knows all of these like ancient Japanese fighting techniques because he used to be a human in most iterations of the story. He used to be a human, and he interacts with the same mutagen stuff that the turtles react with, and so he turns into a rat, and they turn into bigger turtles, which is interesting. And then in my favorite iteration of the show, the 2003 TV show, he was the pet rat of the guy that everybody says in other versions that he actually is. This karate dude named Hamato Yoshi. In the 2003 version, he's the pet rat of Hamato Yoshi. And in every other iteration, he is just the guy, but he got turned into a rat because of mutagen and stuff. And I don't understand why they do that, because like the mutagen exists in the 2003 version of the show, but like he doesn't really address that with his transformation or anything like that. But that's just an odd plot related thing from that show that I don't need to talk too much about right now. But going back to the reasoning for why I chose this topic this week is people don't know who April O'Neil is. If you are unfamiliar with the Ninja Turtles, April O'Neil is the friend of the Ninja Turtles, the human friend of the Ninja Turtles, who is always a girl and almost always wearing yellow for some reason. Except in the 2003 show, she has red hair and she's wearing purple and stuff. But they all have, it's the red-headed friend of the Ninja Turtles. And April O'Neil, like, that's a thing that people talk about. It's like, are there any girl Ninja Turtles? No, but there's April. And April is just as big of a character as the Ninja Turtles. In the original 80s show, she was a reporter, and so she wore a yellow jumpsuit and stuff, and she was holding a microphone all the time. And it was also the 80s, so it's like that made more sense. In the 2003 show, I think she was still a reporter. She was still a reporter in that one. And then in the 2013 rendition, the Nickelodeon rendition of the show, she was a high school student. She was just a high school student. And Yeah, so they really leaned into the teenage aspect of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the Nickelodeon show, and I think that's fine. Um, but like they're all teenagers in that show, as opposed to the other iterations of the show where they're kind of like young adults, like college aged or like slightly older than that. Um, but the turtles are also much more like uh, immature in the 2013 version of the show as opposed to the 2003 version where they're like really, really dark for some reason. Like, it's always a thing that you have to differentiate the turtles somehow. So, like, Leo is always like the one with the blue, but he also has the smallest head of all of them a lot of the time. And then they're all a slightly different shade of green. Like Raph is always a darker green than any of the rest of them, but that's just because his character is a lot darker than the rest of them. But yeah, so April is she's just along for the ride a lot of the time. In the new show, the 2013 show, um she has like mutant powers or something like that, but she's still like a person. And so like they really leaned into the mutant aspect as well as the teenager aspect. So like they focused on all of the aspects of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So they're teenagers and they're mutants and they're Ninja Turtles. So anyway, we can talk about my first experience with the Ninja Turtles. I was like the first time I was exposed to the Ninja Turtles. I was born in 2004. So the 2003 series of the Ninja Turtles was wrapping when I started watching Ninja Turtles. I started watching the Ninja Turtles, I think, in 2011. Yeah, pretty close to that. I watched it on my Kindle Fire because that was how crazy I was back in the day. That was how I would watch my Ninja Turtle episodes, and I would only be able to watch like one or two a day because I was a child, and so the Ninja Turtles were super fun though. I really liked. The reason I say I like the 2003 version of the show as opposed to the rest of them is they go on so many different side quests in the show, and they like have arcs for like the first couple seasons, and then as they get into the later seasons they start branching out and the arcs become more dramatic, and then arcs from previous seasons that you thought were done ended up coming back, and I was so excited about those. And I think Ninja Turtles has always just been a great version of like a recurring cartoon that the writing still holds up. Like every Ninja Turtles version that I've seen a lot of most of them is every version of the Ninja Turtles is very similar narratively, and I think that's what makes it so appealing, because the 80s generation got the original, and then the early 2000s kids got the TMNT 2003 version of the show, and then the 2010s, late 2000s kids got the Nickelodeon show. And so they're just constantly reintroducing the same characters for a different generation, and I think that's awesome. Like, I love everything that they do with the Ninja Turtles, and like they have always done really, really well at storytelling. The dialogue hasn't always been the best. I will admit that. The dialogue does get cringy sometimes. But on the other hand, like, the dialogue doesn't have to be great if the story is good, right? So if they're following a nice, cohesive story, it doesn't matter what they're saying, right? It matters what they're like doing to propel the story forward. The very first episode, I remember vividly, the first episode of the 2003 show is Baxter Stockman and the Mousers, the little robots that were supposed to go underground in New York City and like eat all the rats or capture all the rats, which is a difficult premise when the leader of the Ninja Turtles is Master Splinter and he's a rat. So you gotta try and avoid those things. Like every version of the show has a way to take Master Splinter out of it and give him his own story at some point. And most of the time it's through the Shredder arcs. But we could talk about that in a little bit here. But anyway, the Mousers is how they do it in the 2003 show. And then they have a villain called the Rat King in the 2012 version of the show that is basically just a guy who's a mutant who can telepathically speak to rats. And so it's crazy. And so they always have their way to be like, Master Splinter can have his own story in this one because it's a threat that only affects him and it doesn't really affect the turtles. And that's why I think that first episode of the 2003 show was so impactful, was because you were trying to flesh out the characters, but you could have the turtles as like side characters to the overall narrative of Master Splinter and the Mousers. And I think the reason I think April was still a reporter was, why was she there otherwise? She was either a reporter or she was a scientist. I don't remember which is weird. But that's just because it was like the most same to the 80s show, but there were still some differences that I can't quite remember off the top of my head because I haven't watched the first episode of this show in probably 10 years. Like, it's been a while, but I could still like vividly remember this first episode because I love this show so much. And so Baxter Stockman is like a recurring villain throughout all of the Ninja Turtle shows, and he's just a scientist who wants to either experiment with the mutagen, with the ooze that they transform with, or he just wants to be a savior for New York City. And it's always thwarted by the turtles, and the turtles are like, why are you doing this thing, man? And he goes, well, I want this reason. And they're like, that's not good, we should stop that. And so they do. And then Baxter Stockman in the movie is in the newest movie at least is voiced by Giancarlo Esposito, which is perfect casting in my brain. I love that. And then he is the one who's experimenting with the mutagen in the bad sense, and so he's arrested by the TCRI people for that. But before he goes, I think he blows up, which is really sad, because he's only in the movie for like 20 seconds otherwise. It's just the origins of the other mutants that we see in that movie is that opening scene, and I really liked it. But anyway, that's besides the point. Baxter Stockman, he recurs in every single iteration of the show. So if you remember anybody from this episode, remember April O'Neil and remember Baxter Stockman, because they come up a lot in Ninja Turtles lore, and I can't even believe that's a thing. Ninja Turtles lore. As soon as I thought about talking Ninja Turtles on the show, something specific that jumped into my memory is a thing only a few people will understand. But if you do, let me know, because I want to talk about this more with some people. But a character that I vividly remember is a character named Bishop. If you know, you know. But Bishop was this guy who the turtles woke up in like experiment tables and stuff like that, and they were in this like bright examination room, and there was this guy in a suit and sunglasses, and his name was Bishop, and that was all we learned about him. But throughout the rest of the sequence of the episode, the turtles managed to escape from the examination tables, and they were fighting with Bishop in this like epic battle sequence, and it was crazy because Bishop was taking on all four of them at once, and he was the best fighter out of any of them. Like, it was crazy. If you know what I'm talking about, like, this scene is one of my favorite in all of animation, because like he is this like super, super overpowered character, and we saw him a lot. Like, he was in the show quite often after that point. But I think it was in the Triceratons arc, actually, that we saw Bishop for the first time. I don't remember, but he was crazy good. And so anytime we saw Bishop the character in the show, we were like, oh no, something's gonna go down. And then he ended up being a good guy. Spoilers, but he was crazy. And then they brought him back in the 2012 version of the show, and they made him lame, and I was not happy. I was like, Bishop is this awesome character, and you just have to like go out and like make him not cool anymore. That's so bad. Like, why would you do that? And then another character that is my favorite character in all of the show, like outside of Leonardo, who is my actual favorite character in the show, he is, of course, the character I'm talking about is Mondo Gecko. If you know, you know. But Mondo Gecko is this guy who turned into a gecko through mutagen and stuff like that. But he's a skateboarder, and he's so funny because he's not good at it. Like, he's very bad. But he was like one of my favorite characters growing up, and then they brought him back for the Mutant Mayhem movie, and he was voiced by Paul Rudd, and oh my gosh, I loved any time Mondo Gecko was on screen, and everybody I watched the movie with was like, what are you laughing at? This is so stupid. And I would go, no, dude, it's Mondo Gecko. You don't even get it. Like, Ninja Turtles, like, has so many like iconic characters like that I can barely even describe, but I would really like to at some point just go back and rewatch the 2003 show, because I hold it in such a high regard that like I think it has to be this really, really good show, but I don't remember if it's as good as I like picture it in my brain right now, and so I don't know how that's supposed to work. But anyway, I said I would get to the villains here pretty quick. Baxter Stockman is a anti-hero. He's an antagonist. Sometimes he works for the Turtles, sometimes he doesn't. Most of the time he doesn't. He works for the higher powers, but there's like a gang in New York that is also in every rendition of the show called the Purple Dragons, and like that was what I always thought street gangs were like, but I was also like 8 at the time, so it's like I don't remember exactly what I thought when I first watched the show, but it was pretty cool. They all had like sick dragon tattoos, and that's how you knew they were the Purple Dragons, was because they all had a purple tattoo of a dragon somewhere. And in the 2003 version of the show, at least, they had this big like beefy dude that was the leader of the Purple Dragons. His name was Hun, and like it was like a reference to Attila the Hun and stuff like that. And so he was just crazy. And then I remember they brought him into the 2012 version of the show, and he was this scrawny little referee-looking guy. And I was like, nope, bring back the 2003 version of him, because he was great. Not like as a character, but I just remember him more vividly. And then this little scrawny dude that looks almost like just a bad Casey Jones, who's another character. They have I keep getting ahead of myself. The Ninja Turtles have two human friends in every version of the show. They have April O'Neil and they have Casey Jones, who is this ragtag, hockey-obsessed guy. And he always wears this mask, and he always like hits hockey pucks at people, which was super cool. Rides rollerblades into battle. It's awesome. He was voiced by Chris Evans in one of the movies, which was really funny. But yeah, Casey Jones is there too a lot of the time. And so, where was I talking about? Purple Dragons, right? So, the Purple Dragons are just like a squandered down threat to the main threat of the Ninja Turtles franchise, which is, of course, the Shredder. If you are unfamiliar, Oroko Saki, if you will, is his actual name, but his alias, or the name that the Ninja Turtles, I believe, give him, is the Shredder, because he looks like a cheese grater. And I think he was voiced by Jim Cummings in the 80s show. Don't fact check me on that, but I think he was the same guy who did Winnie the Pooh and Tigger and Darkwing Duck and all these other crazy voices. Jim Cummings. Who would have thought he was the voice of Shredder in the 80s show? And like, the 80s show was crazy for other reasons, like because they had the two main villains of the show as Krang, which is an alien brain thing, and the Shredder. And I believe that Krang is also in every iteration of the show in some capacity as well. The Krang, I could talk for a whole other 45 minutes about the Krang itself, but I'm focusing on Shredder right now. Shredder is in some iterations of the show, he is a brother in arms to human Master Splinter. And in the 2003 version, he was just a guy who wanted Hamato Yoshi to go fight for him in Japan and stuff, because Shredder is also the Foot Clan. He's the leader of the Foot Clan of ninjas in Japan, and most of the time they're actual people. The ninjas of the Foot Clan are actual people. In the newest version of the show, they're robots. And so it's just like they just make a bunch of robots, like picture B-1 battle droids from Star Wars. It's that, but they look like ninjas. And they have like swords and knives and smoke bombs and all that sort of stuff. The Foot Clan does. But I believe in the 2003 show they were actual people, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But the Foot Clan is another threat that they're like, oh my gosh, you guys, like, we're fighting this army of ninjas. And then Splinter is like, oh my gosh, Shredder's back, this is not good. Which, like, that is the most confusing set of names for a child is Master Splinter, who is the good guy, who is the rat, and Shredder, like two S names that end with an ER suffix. And oh my goodness, it's very difficult to differentiate when you're 9 years old. I definitely called Shredder Splinter and vice versa numerous times. But anyway, in the end of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, they have, in the first film, they have Superfly, who's voiced by Ice Cube, which is super fun. But then at the end, in a post-credit scene, they teased a Shredder appearance in a animated Ninja Turtles movie, and I am all for it. I've been waiting for, like, another Shredder story because I think, honestly, the 2003 version did it the best. 1980s Shredder was just stupid. Like, he was not a smart antagonistic character at all. And then in the 2012 show, he was kind of scary, but he was also an idiot. He just didn't make the smartest decisions. He acted for revenge sake only. And then in the 2003 show, like, there was actually, like, history there, and it was super, super cool. Like, the first, I think I remember the first Shredder episode, Leonardo gets invited to go meet with Oroku Saki, and they talk about, like, peace, and then they're like, nope, that's not gonna happen. And so Shredder shows up on, like, a rooftop surrounded by a bunch of his foot soldiers, and then he takes his helmet off, and it's Oroku Saki, and everybody's like, oh, we totally knew that, but the turtles didn't. And it was a really cool reveal. It's like, he also had this really cool wispy voice, the Shredder did, in the 2003 version of the show, which was awesome. It actually sounded like he was behind a mask of metal, and yeah, it was a really crazy show. And then there's a thing in film scoring called a leitmotif, which is like a little sound bite that plays to alert the audience that this character is showing up. Like, think of it as like a theme song, kind of. But anyway, the Shredder leitmotif from the 2003 Ninja Turtles show, if you know what it is, I applaud you. This haunted me for the longest time. Like, it's a very specific thing that plays every time the Shredder is shown in that show, and it haunted me for so long, and it was so scary. But I don't even know how to describe it. I'm not even going to try to replicate it because I'm not going to do that to myself right now. But anyway, if you were to watch a Ninja Turtles show, I would highly recommend the 2003 version, just because, one, if you can find it, it's very difficult to find it nowadays. I don't know. I think it's on Paramount Plus, which is really nice. It's really nifty. But anyway, if you were to watch one, I would recommend that one because it has a lot of different genres that it's involved in. If you're in it for just like some background noise, watch the 2012 one, because that one's a little more immature, and so it's like the jokes are more angled towards kids, but like the story is still good in the 2012 one. So if you want something as like background noise, put that one on. There's an episode in season 3 of the 2012 show called Dream Beavers, and my family, if you're watching this, you know exactly what episode I'm talking about. but it's just a whole scene. It's just a whole episode where they're out in the cabin in the woods, which, if you know anything about Ninja Turtles from 2003 onward, that is a pivotal plot point. But they're out at this cabin in the woods, and they go to this convenience store, and then they get haunted by dream beavers, which are terrifying. Some of them are. One of them's not, but his name is Dave. If you know, you know. But that episode I remember as just being like a funny spin on a horror episode. That all being said, watch the 2003 version of the show because it's got like heart. It's got a wide variety of different things. So if you wanted to stop watching, you can, because there's a whole bunch of different like season arcs that you don't necessarily need to watch to understand the full scope of the show. But they're fun if you just like the Ninja Turtles. They have samurai in there. One of my favorite characters from the show is a rabbit samurai named Usagi Yojimbo, and they brought him into the 2012 version of the show, and I was so excited. He had his own separate version of comics back in the day, and so they really wanted to bring him in, and he and Leonardo were like really good friends, and I was like, yes, this is awesome. But he's like a little rabbit samurai, and oh, it's so cool. And so they have like a samurai arc, they have like a tournament arc, they have a Tai Chi arc, they have a spirit dragon arc, they have a demon zombie shredder arc, they have a time travel arc. Like I said, I could spend hours and hours talking about what I remember from this Ninja Turtle show, and I'm trying to condense it into a shorter amount of time. I might make this a series. I might talk more about Ninja Turtles, but they do so much in just the 2003 version of the show. But again, if you were going to watch any of the Ninja Turtles ever, watch the 2003 version of the show because it's so good. It's maybe me just glorifying my childhood, but it's a very, very good show. And I would highly recommend it to anybody who is interested in that. Well, that all being said, I'm going to bring us into this week's edition of 3 Things You Need to Know. So, number 1, it's election week. Woo. I don't really want to talk about what happened with the election just because I don't necessarily want to get as involved with my political opinions as most people do. But I think a big thing with this election season anyway, so it was Kamala Harris running with Tim Walz, who is the governor of Minnesota. And so there's that side of it. And then there's the other side, which is former President Donald Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance. And so those are the two sides of it all. And I think, what do I have to say about this election cycle? I think it was fine. I voted like way too early, but yeah. I voted like way too early, but I also did a lot of research on the policies because it is my first presidential election. So I made a big deal about going through and looking about what I value as an American citizen and what I think the not only just the presidential candidates, but also the state reps and things like that, what they could bring to the table from a Democratic standpoint. And I think there was only one bill on the ballot in the state of Minnesota, at least. I could be wrong, but it was a DNR thing about keeping our lakes clean and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm just glad it's done. Like, I've been getting nonstop political ads for like a month straight now, and I'm like, I don't even live here. This isn't my district. Like, I go to school an hour and a half south of where I actually am voting for, so I did have to do a little bit of research in that regard. But one of my good friends who's out in Washington, D.C. right now studying political science, he's one of my one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. He has been willing to offer like advice and stuff like that on voting and things. And so it was fine. I'm not like too in one camp about the results, but it was an election. It happened. I'm not gonna read too much into it. I'm just gonna wait until the next one, honestly, because I don't really care all that much. It's like fantasy football. It's like I care a lot in the research phase, but like once it actually happens, then I'm like, it's whatever. I don't really have to read too much into that after the fact. But it was cool that I got to vote. I did an absentee ballot and stuff, so I sent it in through the mail and things like that. But yeah, it was cool that I finally got to vote in an election. Yeah, it was really cool. If I had $1 for every time somebody on social media said that I need to go out and vote, I'd have a lot of dollars. So I might have to do something with that someday. Who knows? Number 2, the University of Illinois, in their collegiate football team, they released some alternate uniforms, including a leather cap helmet. I think this is kind of cool. Like, they went through and they made a alternate uniform that was different than anybody else's that I'd ever seen. And I watched a video of how they made the helmets, and like they painted them in a very specific way, and like you had to have like certain areas on it guarded for most of the process, which was really, really cool. But they made like leather cap helmets, which is kind of awesome. And now, like in the NFL, they have like the outer protective layer of pad on the helmets, just to reduce concussions and things like that. But it was really cool to see like a leather cap design on a helmet, and I really hope Illinois isn't the only team that's able to do that. But that was a really cool thing that I saw over the weekend. And then number 3, Krispy Kreme donuts, a widely popular donut chain here in the U.S. at least. They sold the rights to their donuts, so now McDonald's at select locations is able to sell Krispy Kreme donuts, which I'm like, that's kind of weird. Who goes through a McDonald's and is like, I want a glazed donut right now from this McDonald's. And so they have like a couple that you can choose from, but they're going to be selling Krispy Kreme donuts, which is interesting because I remember hearing that the Glazer's recipe from Quick Trip is a very similar recipe to Krispy Kreme's original donut recipe, and they sold it to them when they were restructuring their financial situation. And so that's kind of cool that they're branching out. I've only ever had Krispy Kreme from like an actual Krispy Kreme spot once. When I went to Branson, we got Krispy Kreme and we brought it on our drive home. And so it was good. It wasn't fantastic. It wasn't like the best donut I've ever had or anything, but it was a good donut. And so having them readily accessible at a McDonald's. I don't know how that's supposed to work, but it's whatever. It's cool. It's a cool thing. There are a lot of fast food restaurants that are kind of merging in a similar sense, and so it's interesting to see some of that stuff. But with that all being said, this is going to do it for this week's edition of the For the Gram podcast. If you liked what you heard, you're more than welcome to follow my Instagram at forthegrahampod, all lowercases, no spaces. And if you have any feedback on the show whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send me an email at forthegrahampod@gmail.com. But that all being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening.